Well, my name is Trevor Jung, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Visioning of Greater Racine, and a proud Racinian. I went to UW-Milwaukee for Urban Studies and Urban Planning, and graduated last December with the hopes of coming back to Racine to rock and roll.
So for just our listeners that don't know what Visioning of Greater Racine is, kind of summarize that a little bit.
So Visioning of Greater Racine is a grassroots nonprofit that wishes to bring people together from every sector of the community to make a grassroots change. The objective is by the year 2030 to create a flourishing community that we're proud to call home. What does that look like? So for over a year and a half, we asked one question, and that was, what does that success look like? And so after talking to over 1,300 people in Racine and its surrounding communities about what that looks like, 11 themes came out of that process, ranging from healthy, productive lives to pride and positive self-image to revitalization and to what we're going to be talking about today, which is transportation.
So tell me a little bit about, so you've got a pretty thick packet of, how many pages is that little guy?
Well, this is actually the summary version, and it's 47 pages.
So the summary version is, I'm sure, summarizing the bigger version, the daddy version.
Exactly. No, with Sewer Pack and the DOT never have a lack of content, so this is more user-friendly.
Called the Eastern Racine County Sub-Area Multimodal Transportation Plan. That sounds really not sexy.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely not marketed in a way that would bring everybody to the table, but that's okay.
Well, what are we talking about?
Yes.
Really?
So the Eastern Racine County Transportation Task Force is made up of municipal leaders from Mount Pleasant, Caledonia, Sturtevant, the City of Racine, the county executive, Jerry Franke, who is a consultant working for the county, and of course the DOT and Sewer Pack. And so Visioning of Greater Racine's role was to serve as an advisory task force to this decision-making body.
So why is this topic important?
Well, this topic is very important, and I appreciate the good question, Denise, because we're talking about one of the largest economic developments in the history of the United States, and there is a population in this community that without proper transportation options would not have access to what really is a state-subsidized economic development project. And so in order to make sure that all taxpayers have access to opportunities that the state is subsidizing, we have to make sure that regardless of where people are living, they have access to these opportunities. And that means, number one, faster east-west travel times to make sure that people from the city can get to work on time. And number two, at transit, making sure that people who are not owners of vehicles or drive have access to these jobs. And as we see the region becoming more dense, becoming more developed, we're going to need people to choose different forms of transportation outside of the personal vehicle in order to get around, in order to be efficient and to best meet the needs of the region as we grow.
So we're kind of like the oasis. If you fly over Chicago, Milwaukee corridor, that little Caledonia, Mount Pleasant strip right by the interstate is kind of the green
belt.
Yeah. And even Caledonia, I'm going to give you a little transportation, kind of a different kind of transportation perspective, is that Caledonia has 84 horse farms.
Oh, wow.
And they have a whole trail system. So, these kinds of topics are really important to talk about in the context of not only getting from people to point A to point B,
right,
but the changing kind of landscape of those communities as
and
well.
Lifestyle.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and that I think is the big question, because I think something that a lot of the folks on the task force visited with this discussion that these monthly meetings brought about is that it's not just about getting people from point A to point B, but creating an environment that attracts skilled workers to decide that they want to live in Racine other than Milwaukee or Chicago when working at the development that will be happening in Racine County. So,
and to be clear, you're talking about Foxconn.
Correct.
And the ancillary.
Correct.
There's about
and the supply chain.
Yeah, the supply chain, from my understanding, is 30 to 40 other companies in the region. That's not necessarily going to all sprout up in Racine County,
Right.
but this particular region is going to see a lot of other companies coming in.
Right, and so I don't think we're going to have a lack of people working in this region, but what we want is for those workers to choose Racine as their home. And so this isn't just about bringing people to the job, this is about them saying, wow, this community has the assets that I want as a skilled worker, and so I'm going to decide to live, work, and play in Greater Racine. And so this task force had two missions. Number one, reducing east-west travel time, which that led to many discussions relating to road improvements, and then also bringing people who currently don't have access to employment on the interstate to those jobs through transit.
Like buses and other alternative, like train. Are we talking trains at all?
So this task force was covering the short term.
Okay.
So they were saying in the next 4 years, what are the things that we're going to need to do to be prepared?
Right.
But if you look at the recommendations that Visioning a Greater Racine brought to the this commission, what you'd see is commuter bus connecting downtown Racine to the surrounding neighborhoods. You'd see an express bus, which is more frequent bus stops from Regency Mall to Foxconn. You'd see bus routes from Amtrak to Foxconn, connecting that with transit, rail in a rail corridor. You'd see expanded bus service in general, more frequency in their hours, pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, modernized transit riders, information. But what I think was the thing that brought about the most ambitious goal is commuter rail extension from Kenosha up to Milwaukee with the KRM plan. And so
I thought, was it just the KR part or the KRM part? Because I know that there was a study that Dickert had kind of commissioned before he left office that was looking at extending, is it the Amtrak?
The Metro.
The Metro,
Yeah.
right. Okay, sorry. So is that what you're talking about, though?
So that would be the initial plan. So the this is less of recommendations from SewerPAC and more so the results that we heard from talking to the community.
Okay.
So
it's kind of more of the ground up versus
Yeah.
the,
So you're going to have your neighbors, you're going to have people who are, high school students and who are college students who say, yeah, I'd like to see the Metro be extended up to Racine, then eventually up to Milwaukee. And so the cool thing about this process is that you had your professionals in the field of planning with SewerPAC and the DOT talking about the real needs of the region with this growth. You had your elected representatives who had conversations about what their constituents want and bringing that to the table. And then what Visioning a Greater Racine did, which is this very formulaic community engagement strategy, which brought about these ideas that we brought to the Transportation Task Force.
So it's a very holistic process.
Yeah, I would say that Jonathan Delagrave, to his credit, brought in all of the stakeholders that he needed to bring in order to make this a really effective conversation.
Now, we have some baggage on this topic.
Okay. I would, I mean, any passionate.
7 or 8 years ago, we were talking a lot about, KRM, the transit, and it was supposed to have like a train stop in Caledonia,
right,
things along that line. And there was a lot of divisiveness around this kind of topic. Do you think we're in kind of a different place?
Well, we
with
should
that,
be.
Do we have the political will to get some of this? Because this is going to cost some money.
Yeah, well, you're completely right. And I think locally that political will exists. You've got people who I think are looking at this in a very practical way where they just want good government and they want to meet the needs of their constituents. So you've got Corey Mason, the mayor of Racine, and Jonathan Delagrave, the county executive, who are simply looking at what are our options in a non-ideological way to make sure that we can improve the region. And I think it's when you get to the state level that you see that stop sign, for lack of a better term, as we talk about transit.
Yeah.
Because
somebody has to write the check.
Somebody's got to write the
check.
check.
And it's the taxpayers.
Right, exactly. And so conversations that we had, 5 years ago are having a dramatic impact on these conversations today. And a good example of that is regional transit authorities. So Governor Walker and Speaker Voss have made their opinion known about this by changing the law in the state by making regional transit authorities illegal. So,
right. That was a kind of an after effect of a lot of the KRM. That was the stopgap of that. Right.
And I think it was because it was a matter of wanting to obviously keep tax levies low and to have people who live in this community pay less to any different type of governing taxing entity. And I think that in a very ideological way to say we want people to pay less, we want government to be small, that was the rationale behind that decision. But I think because of the growth that is unprecedented in this region, and because of the density that's going to be created, and because of the need that Foxconn and other employers in the area, it's going to be massive. And so we need to just do what's fiscally responsible and not put the burden on cities that are already struggling, like Racine, to make sure that we fund transportation properly, or the county, which is already, seeing a downgrade from, I believe it's S&P, on their bond rating, which I imagine will go back up as you see more development coming. But it is the role of the state to either be a part of aiding this process to get people to and from work, or to simply change the law to make sure that as a region, Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha can come together and say, how can we pool our resources?
Right, because you've got a math problem, though, too, in that you don't have very many skilled workers in this particular area. A lot of the people, we're at the lowest unemployment rate that we've seen in a decade. So we've got to get new people in the door.
Right.
I had some conversations a couple of weeks ago with Kurt Bauer, who's the executive director for Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and he was talking about this very topic, and he has been for quite a few years, with regards to how do we get people into Wisconsin and get them working that are skilled, because we have that problem with the skills gap with people. We have people that are unemployed, but they don't necessarily have the skills that employers need.
Right. And my opinion is that we're not utilizing all of our tools in terms of funding to guarantee the success of this project. So it's one thing to bring in a massive employer and create this opportunity, which is excellent. It's another thing to make sure that everybody, regardless of where they live, have access to these opportunities. And so you don't expect people in Superior or River Falls or Sturgeon Bay to pay for bus routes in Racine, but what you should expect is that as a region, seeing the value of people being connected to employment is something important. And so what we need to do is, I think, make it possible for the region to work together. I mean, we're in the third largest economic region in the United States and in the 10th largest economic region in the world, and we're not allowed to pool our resources around transportation. To me, that just seems counter.
Is it transportation, or are we talking the intermodal piece? Because we think about or the multimodal piece, which in multimodal meaning buses, trains, alternative
bike, pedestrian,
but we think about transportation a little differently when it's not cars, because we love our cars.
Right.
But on the other side, how many millennials have their driver's licenses in this particular area? And
that was an argument, I think, early on before Foxconn came into the picture, is that we have an automobile culture. You go to high school, while you're in school, you get your driver's license, and then you drive. And that's just what we do in Wisconsin. We're not like, New England. We're not like San Francisco. We're not like these, cosmopolitan cities across the world that have these real dynamic transportation systems. But honestly, like I said earlier about the scale of the economic power of this region, we better catch up, because that's going to be the direction that this region is
heading. Are we behind, though?
In terms of transportation services, absolutely.
How do we know that? And what tells us that?
So, good question. So you have the Greater Chicago-Milwaukee region. So the Office of Economic Development and Cooperation, or the OEDC out of London, did a report on the city of Chicago and city of Milwaukee and Gary, the greater region. And that study indicated how many potential jobs could be created if there were what's called good transit. And good transit is something defined by the professional planners as people being able to go where they'd like to go without a car in a reliable way. And so that international think tank identified transit as a major concern in this region in order for us to grow in the future. So that is something that I think a lot of folks are looking at now and saying, look, it's an all hands on deck moment. Like, let's not be ideological about this, and let's just do what's in the best interest of workers and residents of this community.
Yeah. So now, okay, so this group happened, this study came out, or the plan came out. What does that mean to Joe taxpayer?
Well, that's a great question, because the discussion of funding hasn't even happened yet. So this is basically a plan that says these are our goals. This is the roadmap. This is what we know we need to get done. Now it's in the charge of the county exec and municipal leaders, including the mayor, to figure out how they're going to make this happen. And so by no means are these express bus routes going to happen or these road expansions going to happen unless that is an agreed upon allocation of funds by those with the resources to do so.
So this is the wish list.
This is the wish list and the plan.
Okay.
So I would describe it more as a plan, because a wish list, you would say, is like what we would hope to do. A plan is saying this is what we need to do moving into the future, and we need to do everything we can to get here, because this is what we know is going to work after discussions that we've had.
Yeah. So, okay, so are there defined steps that is part of this, the priorities?
Yes.
As far as, so kind of give me like 2 or 3 of the biggest
that's a
kind of
great
overarching themes that kind of came through this. What do we need to tackle first, other than we need to get rid of all highway construction equipment
right.
in this town right now?
Seriously.
Because like if you go on I-94, I've never seen so much stone rubble piled so high.
Right.
Oh
I mean, everywhere is looking like Douglas Ave now. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh, it's so horrible.
So I am flipping through this document because I'm trying to find. No, that's not it. Because there is like literally a list.
Do we know? We probably do know this, and it's probably in this document as far as like how many commuters people commute, how many people are working where they're living.
That's a great question. I think that's in here, but I found your question about priorities. So Denise, you had an excellent question about what are the priorities of this group as we look at our 1 to 4 year plan. And so what we're looking at is capacity expansion studies, signal coordination and access management, and speed limit analysis for the east-west connections.
So we're trying to kind of streamline where we're going, make it easier to get from point A to point B,
right.
Widening roads?
So at the end of the day, the objective is how do we get people from the heart of the city of Racine to the interstate faster? So that means, looking at what the speed limits are going to be. That means signal coordination so that people aren't stopping every signal, so that once you're on a roll, and you're driving and you're making your way to work. So those are the types of things that we were looking at in terms of road improvements and traffic improvements. And that was, I think, what the emphasis was in the beginning of the discussion.
Yeah.
But as the advisory task force and as the community members started attending the meetings, the conversation became how do we get people who normally don't have access to these jobs that access. And so that really has to do with public transportation. And so if you look at the number one priority over the 1 to 4 years, that's transit. So it's commuter bus and a park and ride from downtown to Foxconn. So creating a system where you connect the downtown and the transit center to Foxconn. And something that we've learned from Amazon and Kenosha is that you need the corporate partner at the table in order to make this successful. So in Amazon's case, you would have a bus that would bring people to a vast parking lot, and that bus wouldn't be able to enter the campus of Amazon, and so you had this disconnect for transit. So what we would need from Foxconn or any other employers in the area is to connect our public transit system to their operations. So that means shift changes. That means those
kind of coordinating that time frame.
Coordinating that time frame, and then also creating that trust where a public bus could go into the campus, drop people off at where they need to be, because this place is going to be massive.
Right.
This is going to be beyond
To put
our
it in
imagination.
perspective, the Amazon building, I believe, is about roughly 1 million square feet in impervious surface, like the building, the physical building. And the Foxconn campus in total is going to be 22 million square feet.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like 5 times, 10 times the size of the Pentagon. It's
yeah,
huge.
it is massive.
Yeah.
And so we need to plan around that for transit. And it would be very easy for us right now to just rely on people's personal vehicles. But if everybody took their car to work, you would be sitting still in traffic
For a long time.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that people who drive cars get to work on time, and we want to make sure that people who don't have access to cars get to work as well. So when anybody says, oh, why am I paying for that bus? I don't use it. Or why am I subsidizing other people's transportation? You're getting to work faster because there are less cars on the road. And so just as we pay for roads, we pay for transit in order to get people to and from work.
Because that is a really big criticism. In fact, that's one of the reasons why Sturtevant and oftentimes Caledonia has this same conversation. Every year the budget comes up for the bus and they're like, well, what's your ridership?
Right.
You know, but we don't have that same conversation that we do with buses around roads either.
Yeah.
You know, we don't ask the question of how many cars were on the road.
Right. And
So it's a little different kind of perspective.
And if you look at our bus system, you actually have a larger percentage of our bus system that's funded by users than you do the Madison bus system,
Oh.
which is by percentage wise. So per capita, you have Racine bus users funding a larger percentage of our bus system than in Madison. So the idea that nobody rides the bus is a misnomer, and it's an anecdotal observation. But if you look at the numbers, you have a demand right now, and the more you improve the system, the more of a demand you're going to have.
So, and then we're going to get more people here.
Yep.
Too, because from my understanding, one of the pieces that Walker has been talking a lot about is inviting people from other states to come to Wisconsin, from Illinois, from Minnesota, and also I know that Kurt Bauer from WMC, which is the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, had mentioned to me that they're looking at like a 3-pronged approach to how we solve this skills gap problem with
Right.
regards to not having enough people that are skilled, which was attraction, retention, and reintegration of employees. So that's people from the prison population all the way to getting millennials here,
Right.
getting people that are trying to leave the workforce to kind of woo them into staying a little longer.
Right.
You know, and that commute gets old, you know, when as you get older, you're just tired of
And,
coming
and you're
going.
completely right. For Wisconsin is is the worst state in the union for incarcerating African Americans. We have a shrinking and aging population, and so we have to think creatively about how we attract people, how we reintegrate people, and how we train people to make sure that they're ready for jobs in the 21st century.
Well, and just as a final note, and I think I'm going to think about what else you want to say at the end of this, but one of the things that I know with the reintegration piece, so there is a huge movement right now to release about 30 to 40% of the prison population within the next 2 years in Wisconsin. And I spoke to a fellow by the, I can't remember his name to save my life, but it was from the U.S. Attorney's Office. That is, they're working with like the Racine Vocational Ministries right now on this initiative called Welcome Home, so that when prisoners come out of the prison system, that they get into the inner workings of how to set their life back up.
Right.
And be successful, because as Kurt Bauer from WMC said, you know, the best social program is actually a job, he said. So those are some things that we're seeing a lot of conversation around. So was there anything else that you wanted to add, Trevor, that maybe I didn't?
Well, the overview of this is that there is a call to action at the municipal level about what we need to do in order to prepare for Foxconn. And I think you have people recognize that transportation and transportation options are critical for not only the success of people in this community, but attracting people to this community and the success of the employers that are already here and are going to be moving here. And so this is about growing the economy from the bottom up, making sure that everybody has access to these jobs, and providing them a lifestyle that is attractive to people who are looking at southeastern Wisconsin and saying, this is a place that I want to live, work, and play.
All right, anything else?
I think that's it.
All right, great, thank you.